you. Well, good evening, church.
Good evening.
I bring you greetings from Franklin, Tennessee. I bring you greetings from Anchor Point, Alaska. I bring you greetings from Majunga, Madagascar. I bring you greetings from Seoul, South Korea. I bring you greetings from Brazil. I bring you greetings from monitors that live throughout the world that listen to our broadcast every day to make sure it's not being jammed, and I'll tell you what that means in a few minutes. I've come to thank you. You have begun supporting our work, and I'm just tickled to be here tonight. I've come to thank you. I need everybody's eyes in mind just for real quick. Thank you. Thank you so very much. I'm also here to give you some chill bumps tonight. Would it please you, would it excite anybody in the room to know that while we worshiped together this morning, that the entire world was covered with the gospel? Would that encourage anybody in the room? Well, that's exactly what happened. I was preaching this morning up in Temple Hills, and while I was preaching, the antennas in Alaska were on, and the antennas in Madagascar were on, and the entire world was being covered with the good news about Jesus Christ. Let me share some things with you over the next 3 hours and a half, and while we're together tonight, I welcome your questions. Would you please give me your questions as we go along, because you might forget to ask it at the end. So I welcome your questions as we go along. What I'm showing you is your ministry. These antennas are yours, and you're helping us use these antennas to declare the good news of Jesus to the entire world. Let's go to the next slide. I want you to know how this whole thing got started. At the end of World War II, President Roosevelt was going to go to the Yalta Conference and meet there with Stalin and Churchill. Back at that time, you could not communicate on the other side of the globe. You could communicate straight line. So President Roosevelt commissioned a second lieutenant to come up with a way to communicate, that he could communicate back to the White House while he was at the Yalta Conference. The second lieutenant came up with the tool of shortwave radio. How many in the room have a shortwave radio? Several. How many have an AM, FM? And every hand goes up. We know what that means. Back at the end of World War II, this second lieutenant discovered that by using shortwave radio, President Roosevelt could communicate back to the White House. Shortwave radio is not a weird radio. It's just the way it receives the radio signals. An AM signal, do y'all get WSN up here on Saturday night, Grand Ole Opry? If you did, it would be because that transmitter sends the signal that far. An FM signal kind of travels hill to hill. You live on the other side of the hill, you might not get that FM station. Shortwave bounces. It literally bounces all the way around the globe. You remember in the beginning, the Bible says that God separated the water from above and the water below. Well, the water above is the ionosphere. And that's what we bounce the signal off of, that literally bounces all the way around the globe. God was thinking about the ministry of World Christian back in creation. He created the ionosphere, which caused that signal to be able to bounce literally all the way around the world. I met a guy a few years ago from New York City. He said, "You work at World Christian?" I said, "Sure do." And he said, "I get your programming loud and clear." "Where do you live?" "New York City." When you see the antennas in just a minute, I'll give you a couple of ideas how he heard our signal from Alaska. But Brother Maurice Hall, by the way, was that second lieutenant. Anybody in this room ever met Brother Maurice Hall? I usually don't travel anywhere that somebody's not in the audience that knows him. He died at 99. His mind was still sharp when we turned on the signal in Madagascar to cover literally the entire world with the gospel. He was that second lieutenant. After the war, he met with a few folks that were kind of experts with radio, and they said that idea will work. 40 years ago, we turned on the signal. I'll tell you about tonight in Anchor Point, Alaska. Go to the next slide. I bring you greetings from a little bitty place in Franklin, Tennessee. There's nothing fancy about our building. We don't have any golden chandeliers hanging in the lobby. You'd be disappointed probably if we did. A one-story building, but this is the home, the international home of World Christian Broadcasting. Inside this building, we do all of our taping, all of our programs. We do 56 fresh hours of programming every week. I'll let you react to that. Can you imagine 56 sermons in a month? In a week. That's what those guys put together. We have 8 guys that do our programming, and you're about to meet them in a second. Let's go to the next slide. We have 4 studios right in the center of our building. They look kind of like this. Four studios right in the middle of our building. We do all of our taping. We got a guy that lives in Brazil. We got a guy that lives in Miami. They send their programs to Franklin, Tennessee, but that's kind of the hub. This is the hub of the hub. This is where it all comes together. Let's go to the next slide. I've got these maps out on a table in the lobby, and I wish you would pick up one before you leave. The map is to show you and to remind me why we do what we do from where we do it. The uniqueness of World Christian is to take the gospel where missionaries can't go or where we don't have enough. So go back 40 years with me. Where could our missionaries not move and preach the gospel 40 years ago? Where could our missionaries not move and preach 40 years ago? Russia, China, and down the Pacific Rim. So that became our focus when we began 40 years ago. To take the gospel into those areas, that's why we went to frigid Alaska. You see the arrows coming out of Anchor Point, Alaska. We have some land there, and we have built 2 very large antennas, and you got fingerprints on these antennas, and I'll show you them in just a moment. But from Anchor Point, Alaska, you see the arrows coming out of Alaska blanketing Russia and China, and then down the Pacific Rim in English. Australia gets it, all the way up to portions in Russia and China. So for 40 hours every day from 5 antennas, that part of the world begins to hear the good news about Jesus every day. From Alaska, we do 20 hours of programming, and we turn on it, let's see, I'm in Eastern time now, 4 o'clock in the morning your time, those antennas are turned on in Alaska. And they're on until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, why would you use those hours? That's prime time in Russia and China. So from those antennas in Alaska, we broadcast into Russia and into China 20 hours every day from these antennas. Let's go to the next slide. I want to introduce to you 7 men. You don't know these guys. You've probably never heard their name. They're not popular names in our brotherhood. They don't have to be. The main thing about the work that they need to do is they need to be able to write in that language and speak that language. So we have natives from those particular places that do the programming. They write the programs, and then they do the programs in that native tongue. These are the guys that do the programming. You need to pray about these folks. These guys are the link between us and the world. These are the guys we're counting on to share the good news of Jesus Christ in a way that communicates the message. All of their programs are different. All of their programs are different because there are different needs. For example, the Russian listeners, they were raised in an atheistic society. So what type of programs do they need? Programs about what? Existence of God? Christian evidences? Archaeology that prove God's existence. So therefore, when Constantine does programs into Russia, he's heavy in those particular areas because that's the biggest need there. When we broadcast into Africa, we don't have to convince those guys there's a God. They believe in 25 gods. So it's a different type of a program. So what our guys do every week, they study what's going on in the areas of the world that gets their programs, and then they'll plan programs to meet those needs. And they do that every day. They amaze me at the great work that we do. This guy right here is Rob Scobie. He speaks English. He's a Tennessee boy. He went to the University of Tennessee, but please don't hold that against him, okay? He does a great job with our English programming. I mentioned they need to be able to write in that language. Every one of our programs comes from a script. I can tell you every word we put out in every language. Now, that's not trying to check up on these guys because we really trust our guys. But they need to be able to write in that language because after doing a program, they'll put that on their web page. They'll put that on the Facebook and other avenues that we have. So they've got to be able to speak it. They've got to be able to write it. I do a program every Thursday about prayer, then I do a prayer. My friends ask me, Andy, what languages do you know? I tell them English and Southern, and I can do both of those at the same time. Rob heads up our English program. Let's go to the next slide. There's going to be a spelling test, so you've got to pay attention. This is Konstantin Chernachenko. Konstantin is our Russian guy. He came to Nashville to go to Vanderbilt to practice medicine. He's a physician. When he came to Nashville, he met Wesley Jones, who taught him about Jesus, baptized him into Christ, and now Constantine wants to heal the soul of his countrymen and not the body. We're not sure. We can't get him to admit, but we think he's still a member of the KGB. We think. We're not sure. And I say that about Constantine just to show you what a neat guy. He's a lot of fun to work with. He does a great job broadcasting into Russia. Let me tell you a quick story. Back when we began broadcasting into Russia, we weren't getting a peep. We weren't getting anything out of Russia. And after a while, we began to wonder, is anybody listening? The wall comes down, And over the next 40 days, the next 30 days, we got 40,000 letters. The wall comes down. Over the next 30 days, we got 40,000 letters. And they all said the same thing. We've been listening to you for years, but it's against the law to listen to Christian radio. We were afraid to write to you. I could tell you stories like that over the last 40 years. Did that give you a chill bump? Can you imagine going to the post office and picking up 40,000 letters? Most of the letters went to Alaska. The post office called Kevin, our main guy there, and said, "Kevin, come get your mail." "I'll be down there after a while." "No, Kevin, you'll come right now and pick up your bags of mail." Constantine heads up our Russian programming. The website into Russia right now is really, really active. He's doing a great job with our Russian programming. Next slide. Edward Ho is the most prayerful man that I know. He'll call me up when I'm on the road just to pray with me. Edward Ho heads up our Chinese broadcasting. Last year he completed a project where he recorded the reading of the entire Bible in Chinese. So Chinese all over the world are going to that website and just listening to the Bible being read in Chinese. He completed that project last year, both Old Testament and New Testament. That's Edward Ho, who heads up our Chinese broadcasting. Let's go to the next slide. Eddie Dodafia, can you tell by his name to whom he speaks every day? He does our African programming. He is from Nigeria. He tapes his programming there, and he visits Africa a couple times a year. But he heads up our program into Africa. Let's go to the next slide. Tony Tadros. You need to pray about Tony. Tony is our guy that does Arabic programming. We started doing Arabic programming 5 years ago, and Tony is our host. He is our senior producer of Arabic programming. We made a decision a few years ago that the next area that needed to hear about Jesus was the Middle East. Would you agree with that? That part of the world needs to learn about Jesus. Tony heads up our Arabic programming. He does a great job with our broadcast, but he started 2 years ago an Arabic Facebook page. Last year, Tony made 1.5 million connections on the Arabic Facebook page. I'll let you react to that. 1.5 million contacts with people. We do shortwave and we really do it well, but that's not all we do. We're on the superhighway making contacts with people all over the world with areas that, in fact, TikTok, did I say that right? Is that website you don't need to go to? Well, that's good. But guess where it's popular? In the Middle East. So we're using that to still contact a lot of folks. That's the tool that they use in the Middle East. Tony does a great job with our Arabic programming, and you need to know that name. Let's go to the next slide. Homaloo, that's how you say his name. I remember how to say it with that movie Home Alone. His name is Homaloo. He lives in Brazil. In a month, I'm going to go visit him. He does our Portuguese programming. Andy, why did you start Portuguese? I'll tell you why in just a second when we go back to our map. Homaloo is doing a great job. He and our Spanish guys have developed an app. I get a program every day at 6 o'clock on my mobile phone from the Spanish organization and their app that they have developed. Three of our programmers, 3 of our languages, you can get the program by an app. This is Homaloo Dante. Let's go to the next slide. Here's our Spanish guy, Jose Castillo. He lives in Miami. If you've ever visited Miami, it is Latin America. Latin America has moved to Miami. He gets a real feel of what's going on in Latin America. Let me tell you some places where the church is active and growing. Colombia, Venezuela, Cuba. There's a lot of great things happening in those countries that when you hear those countries, all you think about is drugs and bad news. The church is growing in those particular areas. We've been able to go to Cuba and baptize several folks and go back and mentor those that we baptized. And there's folks there that do the follow-up with those folks that are baptized. Jose is doing a great job with that part of our program. Those are 7 guys, 7 links to the world. And you need to pray about those guys because they are our link to the entire world. Let's go to the next slide. I don't know what country stirs your heart, but we've heard from all these countries. I don't know what countries stir your heart, but these are places we have listeners. Let's go to the next slide. more places where we have listeners. In fact, we have listeners in every known country of the world. I don't know what stirs your heart, but we've heard from all these particular places. Let's go to the next slide. More countries we've heard from. Let's go to the next slide. We're not about antennas. We're not about wire. We're not about Facebook. We're about people. Here's one of our converts from Cuba. Let's go to the next slide. And there's some names of our listeners who were brought to Jesus. Let's go to the next slide. One of our Cuban listeners. Let's go to the next slide. Another one of our Cuban listeners. Andy, how many folks did you baptize last year? I have no clue. You see, the church is multiplying. In Cuba, they have house churches. And when their house churches get to a certain number, they start another house church. So like it was in the first century, the church is multiplying in Cuba. I have no idea how many folks have we baptized. But these are the folks, this is the places that are very, very special to us, and I'll bet you they're special to you as well. Next slide. Back to our map. Our focus is to take the gospel where missionaries can't go or where we don't have enough. So let me welcome you into Anchor Point, Alaska. And you see Anchor Point, Alaska on the map, and I hope that you'll pick up a map by the time you leave tonight. And you see the arrows coming out of Anchor Point, Alaska. Let me show you your antenna in Anchor Point, Alaska. Next slide. Let me welcome you to station KNLS. Why K? We're west of the Mississippi. All the radio stations east of the Mississippi is W. So we are K because we're west of the Mississippi. In fact, we're just barely hanging on to the edge of the land. There's, from about a mile from this sign, there's a sign that says, you're on the furthest west paved highway of North America. That's how far west we are. But station KNLS, you can't use your company name when you're broadcasting internationally. So we're known in China as the New Life Station, NLS. Let me show you your antennas. Let's go to the next slide. There's your two antennas. Well, Andy, I see 3 towers. Well, the 3 towers hold up 2 curtain antennas. The tower is 365 feet tall. It's 385 feet to the next tower. You see the towers on the right are painted. You either got to paint them or light them. The one that we painted was the one that we built and turned on in 1983. In 1983, we turned on that antenna, 365 by 385. You see a curtain antenna. It's a curtain. The towers are holding up the curtain. Would you look at me for a second? Here's really what an antenna looks like. It's really a two-sided obstacle. It's a two-sided thing. You don't move those antennas, but you can skew the signal 15 degrees 4 times in each direction. So I'm in Russia, I'm in another part of Russia, and now I'm in China. Our main issue in Alaska, what would you think it would be? Main issue? Huh? Nope. Well, part of the weather. Not snow, not ice, not black bear, not moose, wind. Wind is our main issue there. At the base of each one of these towers, there's about 3 or 4 concrete wheels about the size of large tractor wheels stacked on top of each other with cables to the antenna and cables to the tower so they won't blow away. Kevin has seen those 16 inches off the ground. That's the wind that we have in Alaska. But from Alaska, we do a very, very strong signal. About 12 years ago, we decided to build a second antenna. So we put up another tower. You'll notice it's not painted. I got a phone call from Alaska just a few months ago, and the guy was complaining that our lights at night was keeping him awake. I told him we could solve that with a $10,000 contribution. That's how much it takes to paint a tower. His conclusion was, I think I'll just go to Walmart and buy thicker blinds. That was why he was going to solve that issue. But you've got 2 antennas in Alaska. If you laid those structures down on the ground, it would cover 6 acres of ground. Standing up there, sending out 32 million watts of power. When these antennas are on, you can stand in front of the antennas and hold a fluorescent bulb in your hand, and the bulb will glow. We're not sure what it does to your heart, but it'll make a light bulb glow. From these 2 antennas, we've made contact with every known country of the world. Let me stop for a second. How about a question? I'm glad you asked. It costs $750 a day for electricity. Do the math. 365 by $750. Homer Electric loves us. We get a Christmas card every year from Homer Electric. We couldn't get them to run a wire down to Madagascar. I don't know why they wouldn't want to do that. But we have a good, in fact, they gave us a little rebate in December with a Christmas card every year. So we have electrical costs of $750 a day. How about another question? This is the time to ask it. Are you ready? All right, we'll go further. Let's go to the next slide. Those are the hours of programming from Alaska. We do 10 hours of Chinese, 5 hours of Russian, and 5 hours of English. I got to change this slide because of something that's just happened, and I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. Let's go to the next slide. Let me welcome you to Majunga, Madagascar. How many have seen the movie Madagascar? Have you seen, if you're grandparents, you've seen the movie. It looks a little different. It looks a little different. What's the famous animal in Madagascar? Huh? A lemur? No, well, no, but the one that's only found in Madagascar is a lemur. There's a lot of lemurs around us in Madagascar. Andy, why in the world did you go to a third world country and build an $11 million radio station? You remember I told you when we started, the uniqueness of our work is to target those areas where missionaries can't go. 40 years ago, they couldn't go to Russia or China or down the Pacific Rim. And now we decided that the Middle East needed to find out about Jesus. To build a station, we need to be somewhere in the Indian Ocean. We went to Mauritius and talked to those government officials. We went to Seychelles, and they were open to us coming. But the president of Madagascar gave us 84 acres of land. I'll let you react to that. He gave us 84 acres of land. Andy, how in the world did that happen? It's an Esther story. He was president for just such a time as this. After we began building and almost finished, there was a coup. And he got sent out of office, but he was there just at the right time. He gave us 84 acres of land, and we built an $11 billion station on that site. Right in the center, you see a big long name, Antananarivo. That's the capital. If you go further north, you'll see one right on the coastline. That's Majunga. That's where our antennas are located. Guys, you can go to Google Earth and see our antennas. And if you'd like to have those numbers to pull up, I got it on my phone. I'll be glad to share it with you. But you can see the antennas in Google Earth. Why'd you go to Madagascar? It's the perfect place to send a real strong signal into the areas of the world that we think needs to hear the good news about Jesus. How about a question about Madagascar? Got about 25 million people that live there. 7% are Muslim. 7% are Muslim. We know of a Church of Christ in the capital city of over 100 with elders. But besides that, the church is very, very weak in Madagascar. The government is a coup. We get along great. In our area, you have a tribal chief, and we keep him happy. We give him a cow every now and then. They call them zebus. A zebu, if you've got two, you're rich. You got one to plow in your fields and on your table, and you have one to pull your carts. It's a very, very poor country. Very, very poor. The government is awful. France rules Madagascar. It could be a very rich country. There are deposits of diamond and minerals. Anybody have ever had Madagascar vanilla or Madagascar chocolate? It could be a very rich country. France, though, rules them. They dominate the elections. There's going to be elections coming up in the next few months. Be prayerful about that. We think there may be a civil war. We get along great. We're just up there doing our thing. We're not up there waving a bunch of flags. We're just using diesel fuel to power our antennas. And how much does that cost? $750 a day. We don't get a cut. We pay what they pay at the pump. It's a third world country. We take care of the Army's trucks. They provide us security. We repair their trucks. Works pretty good. How about a question that you might have about Madagascar? Well, come and go with me next February or March. In fact, come and go with me in July to Alaska. Be a great time for a cruise. On July 23rd, we're going to celebrate 40 years of broadcasting. We're going to have a little get-together on that Sunday afternoon. I'd love to have your congregation represented. So give that some thought about July 23rd. I bring you greetings from Madagascar. Great, great people. Great, great people. And the guys that are working there at our station. Let's go to the next slide. There's back to our map. I want you to see where Madagascar is, and you see it's off the coast of Africa, and you see arrows coming out of all kind of directions. You have 3 antennas in Madagascar. You got 2 in Alaska. And the ones in Madagascar look just like the ones that we have in Alaska. One of those antennas is aimed to the east. As you can tell by looking at the map, Australia gets it from both directions. We're mainly using that antenna to broadcast the gospel into India. How many folks live in India? Oh, just 1 billion. In fact, it's about to overtake China as the largest population country in the world. So with that one antenna, that's our main focus. And we get a lot of correspondence out of India. We found out about 2 congregations that live on opposite sides of the country. They met at a conference. How'd you find out about Jesus? Programming of World Christian. Well, we did too. They didn't know about one another. And there are stories like that all over that we could share with you. The second antenna is aimed directly north. The Middle East countries that make the news, that's our footprint. That's our footprint of our programming in Arabic. Voice of Hope is not connected with us. They are another religious organization. But when they heard our Arabic programming, they asked permission to play our Arabic programming 2 hours every day free. How long did it take us to make that decision? I'm a little jealous of them. Their address is the banks of the Sea of Galilee. I just think that's pretty neat when you're telling them about Jesus, doing it from the banks of the Sea of Galilee. But they have been doing this now for the last 2 or 3 years, and we'll keep doing that because that just enlarges our footprint in the Middle East. The second antenna, as you can tell, the arrow is going above those 2 red lines, which means we could add any of the languages spoken above where the Arabic is spoken. In fact, one of the questions I want to ask you tonight, and I'd love feedback from you by the time we end up, what's the next language that we need to add? We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. The second antenna is aimed directly north. And then the third antenna is aimed directly west. We blanket Africa. Andy, what languages do you use in Africa? English? Well, why do you do English into Africa? There are 10 main languages in Africa. No more than 10% of the people speak any one of those languages. So if we spoke in Swahili, which is the most popular, only about 10% of the people speak Swahili. If we spoke Swahili, 90% of the audience wouldn't understand our message. So why would you use English? Because so many people are learning English in Africa. In fact, the church is growing in Africa. There are more congregations of the Lord's Church in Africa than there is in North America. Would you react to that? Places that a few years ago was not the centers of Christianity is changing over the last several years. So we're able to blanket Africa. Remember I told you shortwave signals bounce? We found out that we could bounce a signal on the water in between Madagascar and Africa, bounce it over Africa. And if you look at the map back to the extreme right, we can also blanket South America. So what languages do we need to add? Spanish and Portuguese. And that's why we added those languages. So look at the 2 red lines for a second. That's the 1040 window. 10 degrees north latitude, 40 degrees south latitude. Between those 2 red lines, 97% of the world's unchurched live between the 2 red lines. 97% of the population of the world that don't know about Jesus, that's where they live. If I can be very frank with you, that's why we went to Madagascar, to take the gospel into between those 2 red lines. And we're having listeners all over that area. And thanks be to God that that's true. How about a question about the map? Andy, do you have to build other antennas? No, we've got all the antennas that we need. We're just now adding languages. Yes, sir.
When you go to different countries, do you get locals to help you with any of your setups and everything?
In follow-up work, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes. His question: do you have locals that help you? And yes and no, because in some of the areas we know we'll never. There's some places in the Middle East we have listeners we know we'll never hear from, because it's against the law to listen to Christian radio. So in those places we have a real challenge of following up with those folks. Well, Andy, what do you do if somebody wants to be baptized? We encourage them to find someone they trust and have them baptize them into Christ. But you see, from our broadcast, we also got to teach you some concept of worship, which is a real challenge. Follow-up is something we struggle and pray about every day. Let me go to the areas where we do have follow-up. For example, in Cuba that I mentioned, we're able to go in there and mentor those new Christians and teach those young Christians. In many of the places in Africa, we can do the very same thing. So there are many countries we do have folks, and for example, in Russia, we know of the house churches in Russia we can plug them into. We have a response office in St. Petersburg, Russia. In China, we know of a large network of house churches in China. So when we hear someone, we'll plug them into one of those house churches. So answer to your question, yes and no. There'll be places that, just because of safety, but we'll encourage them to find someone they can trust and baptize them into Christ. Great question. How about another one? Yes, ma'am.
Do you ever have the communist countries try and block the signal?
Great question.
And second question, and oppress the people? Are they able to find out and then oppress them?
It's a great question. She asked, do some of the communistic countries block your signal? And the answer is yes. What that means is they'll find your frequency and send in loud noise or loud static to drown out your signal. When that happens, how should we feel? We feel really good, because that means we're saying something worth being blocked. We also giggle, because it's very expensive and very difficult to do. Well, Andy, when they block your signal, do you lose the audience? No, we just change frequencies and keep right on broadcasting. Shortwave listeners knows that's going to happen. Let me put it like this. Back in Nashville, if I want to find CBS, I go to Channel 5. Here, if I wanted to find CBS, what channel is it on TV? On your 6? Where would I start, though, looking for CBS if I'm here? I'll start at 5 because that's what I'm used to. And I would look right above or right below. Well, that's a shortwave listener. When the signal gets jammed, they know that's going to happen. So we'll change the frequency. They'll look right above or right below and pick us up there. Edward Short, who used to be over our Chinese broadcasting, was in Beijing one year, listening to his own program on his cell phone. On his radio. He heard it get jammed. He gets on his cell phone, calls Alaska. They just blocked our signal. They changed frequencies, kept right on broadcasting. Pretty neat technology. It's old technology, but it works. It's a great question. Was that the second question that you asked?
Can they find out and oppress the people?
That's a great question. Can they find out the people that's listening and oppress them? Well, you're making me go ahead and spring what I was going to say for 5 minutes. January 1, we started programming into North Korea. January 1, and on the table in the lobby is the first program we did into North Korea. Pick up a copy before you leave. In North Korea, it's the most persecuted country in the world. People that are found out to be wanting to learn about Jesus, they're thrown in jail, persecuted, or even killed. There's a report that says there are as many as 175,000 people in the jails in North Korea because they want to follow Jesus. If they try to use the internet to find out about Jesus, the government can trace that to their front door, and they're in big trouble. If they use a mobile device, the government can trace it to their front door, and they're in big trouble. Guess what they can't trace? Take a wild guess. Shortwave radio. And we blast North Korea every day with a good, strong signal for 2 hours. And they can't do anything about it. Can they block it? Yeah, we'll just change frequencies and keep right on broadcasting. But it might be one of the safest ways to get the good news of Jesus into North Korea. Great question. How about another question? These are your antennas. This is your ministry.
How do you get the reports of what's happening, Andy, from all of these third world countries and countries where it's illegal to do these things that you addressed? How do you get the information about a church here, church there, maybe someone who's baptized or those who were baptized or something? You mentioned earlier that you didn't get much information on that for these reasons, but when you do, how do you get the information?
We get the information because of emails that we receive, even phone calls that we receive. We can trace, we can see where people are contacting us on their internet. We have ways that we can find out where they are and make contact with them that way. The house churches in China, the house churches in Russia, they know who the Christians are and who to contact. So therefore, we'll plug them into those house churches in those particular regions. We just try to do the best job that we can. Our guys have some real contacts with, for example, Tony with the Arabic programming. He's got a couple of guys that live in Egypt, and they're able to relay information to Tony about what's going on in Egypt and the contacts that they've made. So we just try to do the best job we can, contacting folks as best as we can. And it's something we struggle with every day because that's really an important issue. Really, really is. Yes?
Is a foreign and satellite plumb out of the question?
Yeah.
Where you can do away with,
It would be cost prohibitive if we used a satellite. In fact, we're covering the whole world right now with 5 antennas. That's the uniqueness of shortwave broadcast. It's old technology, but it just works. And everybody outside America's got a shortwave radio. There are 3 billion shortwave radios in the world. 1 billion are always on, with an average audience of 3 listening. So those antennas, we'll hang with the Lord's ionosphere and to keep bouncing that signal. I mentioned earlier about the guy from New York City, and I thought, how in the world does he get our programming? Okay, you got 2 antennas aimed away from America, but the signal travels all the way around the globe, so he may be getting it when he comes back around the globe and hits New York there. Or it could be that those antennas, they're putting out 32 million watts of power. Reckon everything comes off the front end, or you think maybe some of it might come off the back side of the antenna. That's a possibility as well. It's great, great technology. It's old, but it sure does work, and it's dependable. It's dependable. You're asking great questions. How about another one? I guess I need to tell you why I'm here. Let me say this, and I'll get your question. I need somebody to go change some light bulbs on top of those antennas. Would y'all volunteer? Would you do it? Okay, just checking. Yes, ma'am.
If manpower and price was no issue, how many more languages would you want to add, and how many would you be able to handle as far as broadcasting goes with the antennas you currently have?
How many languages could we add, should we add? Well, we'd like to add as many as we can. It's a matter of raising funds, and we were able to raise some funds last year to begin Korean programming. So it's a matter of, we would love congregations to adopt a country. We'd love to have congregations just to adopt a language. We don't have to build any more antennas. We just want to add as many languages as the Lord would like us to add. And right now we have 8. So we're blessed with those 8, but we'd love to add more than that. Any other questions? Are we good? Are we good? Let's go to the next slide then. There's your campus in Madagascar. We had to build some buildings there. We have to do our own electricity there. Can you see the 4 towers? In the 4 towers, there are 3 curtains hung in between the towers, just like the ones in Alaska. There's a building on the far side on the left. Kevin and Nancy Chambers are from Alaska. They built everything that you're going to see here in Madagascar. They'd go over and spend 7 months, come back for 3. Go back for 6 months, come back for 4. Any difference in Madagascar and Alaska? Would there be any difference? We built them a nice little home. Ladies, answer me a question. We're going to build you a home in a third world country. What's the most important room in your house we're building for you? What? Well, after the bathroom. Kitchen. We built Nancy a real nice kitchen. We caused a marital problem. She wanted that kitchen in her home in Alaska. I was there last October. Nancy got her kitchen, and all is well in their house. Let me tell you about Nancy. Let me tell you, I love Nancy Chambers. She's the wife of our main guy that just retired after 40 years. Nancy Chambers is a pioneer woman. First time I was in their home, when my first trip, we're sitting in a bay window of the log home that Kevin built. We're looking at the Cook Inlet. She has beautiful, beautiful flowers. She looks out the bay window and she says, "Magpie, magpie." There were a couple of magpie birds eating her flowers. Nancy got up from the table, went back into the back bedroom, walked back through with a shotgun. She walked out on the deck and dropped those birds. She comes back in and I went, "Okay, Nancy, whatever you say." Nancy's a pioneer woman. She's also master violinist for the Alaskan Symphony Orchestra. She's a neat lady. She's a great companion to Kevin, and they did a great job. Can you tell what our main issue is in Madagascar? Fire. It's so dry and arid, fires pop up just like that. We've got about 3 guys, that's their job, to make sure we don't have fires on the property. And they're doing it. We've had 5 or 6 fires. We have cyclones. We don't have constant wind like we have in Alaska, but we have things like cyclones. In fact, we've had 4 this year. 2 of them hit our station. Guess what happened? Nothing. The Lord protected those antennas. We were very fortunate. We built some buildings there. Let's go to the next slide and you can kind of see them maybe. Let's go to the next slide. There's the 4 towers and the 3 curtain antennas hanging between, just like the ones in Alaska. Let's go to the next slide. The big building is the big building that all of our equipment is in. We built a bathhouse and a tool shed. Let's go to the next slide. Guys, we built 2 65,000-liter tanks for our diesel fuel. They bring it out, 18-wheelers, and we store it in these big long tanks. To build those, they came in sheets from America. They bent them, welded them, now painted them. That's where we store our diesel fuel. And again, we don't get a cut. It's a third world country. We got to pay what they pay at the pump. Let's go to the next slide. Those wires are hooked up at the station, and those wires take our programs to this box. Go to the next slide. It goes to that box, and then that box sends it to the right antenna. This is a big deal. We're not flying by the seat of our britches. This is a big deal. We are highly respected in the shortwave industry world. Kevin Chambers is a name that's known all over the world. They respect the work that is being done by World Christian. It goes to that box and then it goes out to the right antenna. Let's go to the next slide. And again, a moment ago I told you this is what an antenna looks like. It's really 2 sides. You don't move it, but you can skew the signal 15 degrees 4 times. That's how you're able to cover such a large territory. Let's go to the next slide. Got a website? Let's go to the next slide. We got a website for each one of our languages. Best way you you can hear our broadcasts is by going to our website. You can hear all of the programs. You might not know some of the languages that we do, but you can go to our website and hear the languages. Let's go to the next slide. We've already talked about those things. Let's go to the next slide. Here's our challenge. Here is our opportunity. God has told us to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, every person. Let's go to the next slide. Here it is. There's antenna 1 and antenna 2 and antenna 3. Antenna 1 in Madagascar, antenna 2 and antenna 3. The entire world is covered from the 2 antennas in Alaska and your 3 antennas in Madagascar. Let's go to the next slide. Let's go to the next slide. So what's next? I've already spilt the beans about what's next. Let's go to the next slide. We added Korean programming. The guy on the left is Sang, S-A-N-G, Yang. He is our voice into North Korea. We started programming January 1st of this year. And he is spending 2 hours every day sending the gospel into the Middle East. Into North Korea. The guy on the right is Bill Ramsey. He lives in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. He does a correspondence course that those in North and South Korea has been a part of for many years. He is our guy. So what's next? What language should be the next language? Pray about it. Pray about that next language that would accomplish the most for the good with the kingdom of God. How about a question as we close? Are you good? This is your ministry. These are your antennas. And I'd like that volunteer of a name or two that would change some light bulbs on the top of those antennas in Madagascar. You can bring home a lemur. I've just caused something, hadn't I? They'll be wanting to go get a lemur. Let's pray together, and I'll turn it back. Now, we're going to sing next. Is that what we're going to do next? Okay, let's pray. Lord, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of your kingdom. Thank you for your wisdom that you created the ionosphere. And we're thankful that we can use that to take a message about Jesus to every corner of the globe. We thank you for the remotest areas from which we've heard. And we ask those people, your blessing on those that live in places where it's against the law to listen to Christian radio. I lift up Sang and his team of people and the broadcast he does into North Korea. I pray for his safety. I pray for his team and their safety. I pray for all of our folks who live in harm's way, who are sending the gospel into places where it's against the law to do what we're doing. We thank you for our past. We're excited about our future. And I thank you for this good church and for the partnership we now enjoy together, taking the good news of Jesus to the entire world. Help all of our eyes to be open to opportunities, that we might use those opportunities to share the message that leads to life and eternal life with you. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you.